You are now listening to the More Than an Admin podcast with Mallory Rothstein. For more, visit morethananadmin.com. And if you haven't already, make sure you go subscribe to this podcast. Thank you and enjoy this episode. What's up, More Than an Admin community? I'm your host, Mallory, of this More Than an Admin podcast. And we have another amazing guest with us today that I'm very excited for us to get to know better. Her name is Natalie Lee, and she is a senior executive assistant to the chief administrative and legal officer, plus a manager within leadership operations for G&A at Atlassian. I first heard of Natalie through a mutual friend, Ro Hoffer, shout out to Ro, who only had such amazing things to share about Natalie. So I did what I typically do and added her on LinkedIn. Then I watched her base webinar with Christine, who is one of our former More Than an Admin podcast guests, which I really enjoyed. And then Christine kindly officially introduced us, which led to a conversation where I felt like I was meeting one of my long lost cousins because so many of the things that she was sharing resonated with me so much that, of course, I wanted to have her on the podcast as well. And now here we are today. So Natalie, welcome to the More Than an Admin podcast. Thank you for allowing our community the honor of getting to know you better and sharing your insights with us. How are you doing today? And what is one person, place, or thing that has brought you joy?
Hey, admin community. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I am doing awesome today, coming off of a long holiday weekend here in the US. One person, place, or thing that brings me joy. I think the easiest answer is to say my husband, but that is too cheesy for my taste. And so I'm going to say the NFL, coming off of a big win for my NFL team yesterday. So feeling really good.
What's your team?
The Washington Commanders.
Oh, look at you. This is not who I thought that you would be rooting for.
Yes.
Because of where you are now. Anyway, can you share also a little bit about your upbringing and roots that have influenced who you are today, as we typically like to ask?
Yes, that's such a great question. So I live in the town that I'm from, which maybe says a little bit more about me than I care to admit. But I grew up in Arvada, Colorado, which is just outside of Denver, Colorado by about 15 minutes. I grew up with both of my parents. My older sister is actually 14 years older than me. So she was not in the house when I was growing up. So I grew up more or less as an only child. My dad traveled a lot, and so it was just me and my mom for most of the time. And I grew up as a competitive gymnast, which I think fuels a lot of who I am as an adult today.
I feel as though being an athlete, I mean, we spoke about this before. I was raised very competitive by my father. I always say that people are lucky that at work I try to limit my competitiveness because I would be like having no friends at work if what I was raised with was exhibited in the workplace. But I'm curious for you, how do you think that being a competitive gymnast has affected how you show up at work today as an admin?
Good question. There's pros and cons to it. I'm not so great at limiting my competitive nature in and outside of the workplace. I'm just super competitive, but more so with myself. And that really comes from a foundation in gymnastics, where gymnastics is an individually fueled team sport, right? So it is a team sport. The team scores are ultimately what determines, kind of the leveling and the outcome of the event, but it's really individually fueled. So if I'm not doing well on beam, then my team won't place well. It has really provided a strong foundation for me as an admin, right? Where I'm competitive with myself. I wake up every day and want to be 1% better than I was yesterday. And that only unlocks, kind of my capacity to support somebody else's success. As good as I am, or as successful as I am, or as bad of a day as I'm having, that ultimately impacts my partnership and my executive success. So I am ultimately super competitive with myself to ensure that I am the best that I can be. And that really comes from gymnastics.
Amazing. And I think that it's really interesting when you put it that way, that gymnast is kind of like this individually, however you said, like fueled sport, but technically you're part of this bigger team, which kind of reminds me a lot of the admin community, where all of us are kind of on our own island supporting our executives, but we make up this greater admin community. So if one person is doing really terrible, it often affects, even though you might not directly be working with the same executives, it really affects the entire ecosystem of an org, of an entire company, if the admin team does not work well together, and if there's one kind of like major weak link, which kind of just reminded me of that right now.
Yes.
And so did you think that you were going to be like a competitive gymnast? Did you have goals of being in the Olympics?
I did, but for me, I wasn't good enough. right? Like I was good. I think that's probably an ego-driven statement, which you will hear a lot of that today, but I wasn't good enough, and that wasn't what I wanted for myself. And Olympic gymnasts, typically, if you're going to the Olympics by the time you're like 11 or 12 years old. And so by the time I was 13, 14, I'd missed the mark.
Gotcha. Yeah, I forget that gymnastics is so young for people to get involved with. Like you have to, like you said, be very good very quickly. And I'm always amazed when I watch the Olympics because that's one of my like favorite sports to watch is gymnastics. Obviously, because the U.S. team is usually very good too, so it makes it fun to watch. But that these girls are literally girls; they're not even a lot of times women yet. So you didn't start your career as an EA. And I mean, I'm curious if even you wanted to be an EA at any point, but you rather transitioned into it. And I was curious if you can just share a little bit about maybe your early career journey and then how was the transition into becoming an EA?
Yeah. I grew up wanting to work in sports, which will not come as a surprise to any of your listeners, especially now the conversations that you and I have had over LinkedIn, especially. I started in sales. I really wanted to be in sports marketing and sports analytics. So I started my professional career in sales at a financial institution. At the same time, the financial institution was getting into a lot of legal trouble, very, very public, very, very national public trouble, which was not something I was interested in doing. So I switched to a different company and really just had a negative HR experience at that company as well. And so this superhero complex, if you will, I call it my Iron Man complex because he's the best. I wanted to change the world of human resources. I wanted to make sure that the people who were experiencing the same things I was didn't have the same HR experience that I did. So I did my education through the University of Minnesota, through Coursera. I got certified in human resources, and I started my HR career at a professional employment organization, which is kind of a way for companies to outsource their HR function. So I was payrolling, I was onboarding, I was doing workers' comp. And really a lot of it was related to the Masters, the cameramen and the audio for the Masters broadcasts or for the Olympics broadcasts or for the NFL cameramen. So I had that fulfillment of still being in sports and also kind of changing the world from an HR perspective. Decided to test my limits and go to an internal HR role, which is where I started my internal HR career and got diagnosed with cancer and then became an EA. So it wasn't like I never wanted to be an EA as much as I just did never think about it, which I think is some of the shadow side of our profession, right? Is that a lot of people just don't think about our role, don't think about our partnerships as an actual career. I wasn't against it. I called my head of people when the CEO called me asking me to be an EA, and I said, I don't even know what an assistant does. Should I do this? And our head of people at the time told me, you would be dumb not to take this opportunity. And so I did. I came back from medical leave after cancer treatment to be an EA to the C-suite other than the CEO, and just, kind of took off from there.
Wow. So there's so many follow-ups that I want to ask you. We'll get to you being a cancer survivor in a little bit. I can definitely relate to not knowing what really an assistant is. That's kind of part of my journey of entering the EA world. When you first became an assistant, is there anything that you wish you had had? I like to ask a lot of people about their onboarding experience. So I'm curious of how do you think that you could have been better prepared to take on the role, and what would you maybe have done differently, or maybe questions you would have asked at the time?
Yeah, I was really, really fortunate to have an incredible mentor and also an incredible platform in Trello. I actually was introduced to Atlassian in my first EA job. I think I would have liked to understand the business side of the business more, right? I knew the calendar things that were coming in. I knew the travel that was happening. I knew what was happening in the C-suite meetings, but I don't know that I knew how some of those decisions that were made at the C-suite would ultimately impact the business. And so what I wish I would have had is a better understanding of the core functions of the business, right? I supported our CRO, and as much as I can tell you what the revenue discipline of a business is intended to do, at that time, I couldn't have told you specifically what his role was or what the roles of his direct reports were or how his success ultimately impacted the larger revenue organization and the company as well.
That is a great point because there's this fine line I find myself even in where I don't even know where the line is, which is you want to get as much as you can involved in the business and know about it, but being also able to have balance in your role. And I'm very bad at it. I'm someone that if I research something or deep dive into it, I want to know everything and every single detail. So there's sometimes where I'm like, Mal, calm down. You don't need to know every single thing, but it is really important as an admin to know at least the basics about what your team does, who the right people are to go to.
Yep.
And I think that you bring up just a really good point of making yourself indispensable. Is a lot of times the admins that do know parts of the business are seen as, I wouldn't say maybe better, but just more invaluable to their executives because their executives can trust them to make better decisions on prioritization or just knowing what the right people are to go to without having to ask the executives. So I think that that's a really, really good point and something to keep in mind if you are someone that's onboarding an admin for the first time. Make sure you include some of the stuff in the business in there or give them the tools and the resources on how they can learn about the business that they're operating in and the business that the people that they're supporting are in.
Yep. Yeah. I my favorite statement to make is you should know enough just to be dangerous, right? And if you don't know, it's okay to have the confidence and humility to own up to that and say, hey, Mal, I actually don't know, but I'm going to go find out for you. This sense of confidence, and Ro actually just recently wrote a blog about it, but the sense of confidence is quiet confidence. It's also something that comes from being a gymnast and kind of presenting yourself as confident in any of your skills that you do. It comes into play in the administrative profession as well, as having that confidence to own your space and having that humility to acknowledge that we don't know everything. We know enough to be dangerous, and we know where to get the answers if we need them.
Yes. And shout out again to Ro, because it's funny. It's on my literal to-do list today to comment on that post because I read it and also loved it. So a good reminder for me that after be commenting on that. I think that that's a good phrase. I'm going to probably put that in the show notes. So when you were first transitioning into the role, and something that I think we spoke about when we first met was about imposter syndrome. And this has been a common theme within this podcast, within a lot of one-on-ones that I have with other EAs. I'm curious, when you were transitioning into the role for the first time, did you have any imposter syndrome and how were you able to navigate it if you did? And if you didn't, what advice maybe to others so that they don't have to navigate through it?
Yeah. One, I would say, remind yourself that it's totally normal, right? Imposter syndrome is a very, very real thing, and it's okay to feel that way. And if you can acknowledge it, it shows an additional sense of emotional intelligence of like, oh, shoot, I'm feeling like an imposter. Why am I feeling like an imposter? So addressing your imposter syndrome like it's another partner in the room with you, right? And I talk to myself all the time. My husband can tell you this. He'll hear me from my office downstairs. But, walking myself through that moment. Hey, Nat, you're recording a podcast with Mallory. You're feeling nervous. Why are you feeling nervous? Are you unsure? Are you unsure because it's the first time you've ever done it? Are you uncertain of what's going to happen? Do you trust Mallory? Do you trust the administrative community? So acknowledging the imposter syndrome for exactly what it is, validating with yourself that it's totally normal and it is okay. And it's a strength to be acknowledged. And navigating it, again, you talk to it like you would any other feelings. I am not a feely person. If it's not happy or sad, I really struggle with the in-between. And so in times of anxiety or disappointment or exhaustion, right? I address those feelings. Hey, Nat, maybe you're feeling exhausted. Why? Well, you haven't touched a water bottle in 3 days. You haven't slept over 6 hours in 2 days. And so I'd encourage our community to address the imposter syndrome for exactly what it is. Don't try to skip around it. Don't try and hide from it. Don't try to ignore it because it will only get worse.
I love that. I think that what you're hitting on, which is something that in an upcoming podcast I'm going to be talking about, is self-awareness and being very in tune with what you're feeling and what you're going through. And I'm a very big believer in speaking with yourself. That's something that I often share. I don't necessarily talk to myself exactly like how you do, but I am for sure talking to myself, whether out loud, in my head, practicing interviewing, or whatever it is going on. I'm constantly in tune with myself. And I think that that's something that a lot of admins have to get very comfortable with, is being able to identify the feeling, but also the why and the reason behind it. So I think that that's great advice. And like you said, this is something that's very common within our community, because I think this is one of the very rare positions where oftentimes I'd say that there's a lot of people in our profession, not everyone. I mean, I have a college degree, and you have a college degree, but there's a lot of people who don't have college degrees, or people that this is their first job, or they somehow got into the role, and you are supporting these usually really high up professionals. And I think that that's, again, just a very rarity, but it's the theme of imposter syndrome is very common within our community due to that.
Yeah. And this is I don't have a college degree. I'm in school right now to get my first
Oh.
degree, but I got here without a college degree, which is okay and normal. And I think we all have different paths in how we got here. But, I'm in school right now. Why? I'm just curious. I like to learn. I like to know things, right? But also coming from the perspective of my executive leader has a college degree. She's a lawyer. And so I want to be able to understand what her experience was like as a student while she worked full time as well.
That's so awesome. So you got your HR certification.
Yep.
So it wasn't an official. Got it. No, that's great. I love that you're in school now. What is the degree that you are getting right now?
Long-windedly, it is a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature with an emphasis in religious studies.
Very cool. You are also an EA manager, and I'm very, very curious. I feel as though this is a hot topic in our community right now about reporting into an EA manager versus into an executive. So I'm curious about, can you share a little bit about your role as an EA manager and how you've developed your current management style?
Oh, the management style is an ongoing one. It is one that, it was very much an imposter syndrome conversation that I had with myself. Like, who the heck am I to be a leader of people, right? It was not ever in my career path. It was not ever something that I really wanted to do until the opportunity came. And I said, why the heck not? So my leadership style is evolving. I tell my team, I try and be a partner. Instead of managing from above, I support from below. So Mal, you can come to me and have a bad day. You can come to me with frustrations. You can come to me with questions. You can come to me and have that safe space to problem solve. And hey, Nat, I have an idea. And hey, I'd like just to talk this through with you. So that's my current shtick about my management styles. I don't manage from above. I support from below and next to you as well. I have an incredible team of 11 assistants across the globe. So both executive and administrative. And I have a team lead that reports to me as well. And they are truly across the globe. So we've got presence in Australia, in the United States, and then in the Philippines as well.
Is the structure at Atlassian the same across the board? Is every assistant reports into a EA manager? Do some people report into their executives, or how does it roll there?
Yes, so we are a centralized function, a 100% centralized function. So not even our founder EAs report to their executive leaders. We all report either to an EA manager or to the head of our function. So I report to the head of leadership operations, who is not an EA and who has a different role. So that's kind of what the structure looks like. Our squads are built specifically around lines of business. So you mentioned in the intro that I support our G&A team. So anybody on my team, the 11 of us, plus 2 new hires in December, we support leaders that are under the general or administrative umbrella. So more specifically, people, legal, and finance is my team.
Interesting. Has it always been that structure at Atlassian? And I don't know what you can share and what you can't share. So obviously, if you can't share anything, don't let me get you fired. I always tell everyone, do not have the More Than an Admin podcast responsible. We are not responsible for anyone getting fired or sued or whatnot, because I'm trying to keep my job and not get sued either.
Yes, no, it has not always been this way. We centralized in October of 2021.
Oh, so recent.
Yep. It's been, we're about 13 and a half-ish months old. I feel like I'm a parent, right? I measure the age in months at this stage. Yeah, we're about 13 and a half months old.
Wow. And so when you got hired into Atlassian, it was a different structure.
Yes, I reported to my executive leader.
Was it, okay, maybe again, you can go into as much detail as possible. I'm just curious, was it like a spicy, like hot topic when you guys switched, or was everyone in the community like, yes, we want this? The reason I'm asking, because where I currently work, it's definitely a hot topic, and there's definitely 2 structures, which is why I always tell people, if you are applying to where I work, make sure that you ask the question who your manager is going to be and what the structure is, because it's extremely different in different orgs based on where you're applying. So just curious if like it was an easy transition, or was there a lot of discussion about this?
Yeah, so I can talk about my experience specifically. I am somebody who is really, really averse to change. I don't like it unless it's like, right, changing my hair color, getting a new tattoo, like those things I'm all fine and good with. But me specifically, I struggle with change to the unknown. And this was a structure I'd never experienced before. And so I did not handle the change well for about 2 weeks. I've told the story internally and externally. I was not a great partner to the leadership operations team, to my executive leader, to my husband. Like, I was just not a nice person. And that came from retroactively, right? Came from this fear of the unknown. It was a change that was changing. It was not something that just impacted me. It impacted the whole team. And for me, I was really hesitant because I had never been in a structure like this before. And so, your advice to people applying to jobs, be it where you work, where I work, or anywhere, the EA reporting structure is a hot topic across our profession. There's pros and cons to both sides of the argument. And, I encourage all candidates to ask the question. Like, it's a normal question. It's okay to ask. You would ask this question if you were in finance or if you were in sales or if you were in HR. Who are you reporting to and what's their expectations of your role?
Something I want to do on this podcast, which maybe you want to rejoin, is have a bunch of people who are EA managers and speaking about their experience and helping those that get asked that, again, like you, we're not planning on being a manager at any point. Because I've had quite a few people outside of the company that I work for say to me, do you know anyone that's an admin manager? Because I got asked to do it. And sometimes they have a choice and sometimes they don't have a choice. So like, I'm just trying to learn. Yeah. So I think that this is definitely a hot topic that I wish that there would be more panels and conversations about, especially just whether it's publicly at a conference, something like that, so that we can make sure that our community that might not have thought about management is equipped and properly skilled in this area. And maybe that's my last question on this topic is, what skills do you think make a great manager, and what have you been trying to really work on as a manager yourself?
If I can back up just by one question,
while
it was not nice for like 2 weeks, I had that self-talk moment to be like, Natalie, you're being kind of not a great person. And just talk to my executive leader, talk to the new head of our function, and really kind of voice my concerns, voice my uncertainty. I'm a big believer in the structure now, 13 and a half months later. It was a challenging transition. Myself personally, I didn't handle it well, but the management opportunity was presented to me. It was something that was like, hey, are you interested? And we'll talk about this, but I'm very much like, I live life like, why the hell not, right? Why the heck not? And so I took it, and I'm super glad I did. Regarding management, there's so many skills. I think Empathy is such a big one. Being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand, what they're asking from you or what you're asking from them. Being able to have a two-way partnership. I'm a big believer in two-way partnership in administrative support, but it also comes to management as well. Being clear on, what I expect of my team or what they expect from me as their leader, or one-on-one, what do they need? What voice of Natalie do they need in the room? 2, the self-awareness to understand what you need to action in this moment. I am somebody who, again, this comes from gymnastics. I don't have a 70% switch. I'm a 0% or I'm 120%. There is no in between. And so it's a challenge for me, something that I have to consciously check myself on. Am I overreacting? Is this moment really calling for this action? Is something actually on fire? Am I jumping into solution something without giving my team the chance to solution for themselves? Are they coming to me as a partner? Are they coming to me as a manager? So really having that self-awareness. And 3, I say this of all administrative support professionals, but I think especially managers, curiosity, being able to lead with curiosity, not only asking the right questions, but asking the right questions at the right time, in the right tone, and of the right people.
Yeah. And I think that what you're hitting at too, like what you were saying before about how for like 2 weeks, you might have not been a great person. 1, to know that you might not be a perfect leader right away or a manager right away, just like our own managers or leaders outside of the admin profession. If you have an executive as a manager, or if you had a manager in college or in whatever high school job or something like that. And I think that you need to give yourself grace and know that it's going to be a learning curve to be a great manager. And so many of the things you shared, I think, are amazing. Definitely empathy is something that a lot of leaders need to be able to have, but just really that self-awareness too for yourself to know even like what are your own strengths and weaknesses, and what can you go to a coach for? What could you go to someone in the community and say, I really need resources on this? So constantly checking in with yourself as well. So I think that that's great. So next thing is, you recently shared on LinkedIn a post about that you don't believe EAs should be called servant leaders. And I'm actually going to read it. I have it up because I think let's read it out. So you even put, the spicy pepper emoji, which I love. And you said, administrative support partners, we should stop using the term servant leadership. It's not inclusive. It's not duplicative of a two-way partnership. And it's just kind of weird. conscious leadership / partnership, intentional leadership / partnership, loyal leadership / partnership, and in parentheses, I don't love this one, and then team focused leadership. Sometimes it's not what's in a name, but how we live up to the name. In this case, it's definitely in a name and how we live up to it. And you got some hashtags I will not read. I'm curious about what kind of triggered and inspired that post. And can you go a little bit more in depth about what you meant by it?
Yes, I'm really glad we're talking about this because this turned into a thing, and it turned into something that it was not intended to turn into. So this was triggered by inclusive language. I was reading a post about how you shouldn't walk into a room and say, "Hey guys," or how if you're planning a work specific event, you shouldn't have just alcoholic beverages available, right? So the term servant leadership is gross for me because of the term servant. One, it's not inclusive. Two, it's not duplicative of that two-way partnership. I am not a servant of my executive leader. We have a two-way partnership. And three, like the word servant brings up a lot, specifically around American history, that like I don't want to go back to, I don't want to repeat, and I don't want to bring into my conscious language. I had a lot of questions specifically around the term servant leadership around religion.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you.
Yes. Yeah, I got a lot of messages and a lot of people were hurt, I think. And, I'm not going to put words in other people's mouth, but I think people felt like I was attacking their religious stance. I want to be super, super clear that that is not what I was doing. One, I'm a religious studies major. And so as much as that's just words, like I became a religious studies major to understand the religions and cultures across the globe. That's what my degree is in. Two, I'm an individual very, very strong in my own faith. And so it was not an attack on anybody's faith. It was a change in vernacular, specifically around the word servant. So I am fully supportive of being of service, right? Even volunteering. When you volunteer, you are in service of a cause or of a community or X, Y, and Z. I am a step parent. On the weekends where my daughter is home, I am in service of a 10-year-old, lovely princess human being who kind of needs a lot of attention at this age, right? The term servant leadership is triggering is not the right word, but the term servant leadership is rooted in a time of American history that I don't want to go back to and that I don't want to repeat. And so I want to be really, really cautious about how we use our vernacular around partnership and supporting either a leader or a team or a community or a cause.
This made me think a lot because I remember when I first saw the post, and I was not like necessarily triggered. I wouldn't say that, but I was like, oh, this is really interesting because I'm Christian. I've heard the term servant leadership a ton.
Yep.
I also then realized, I don't really like the word servant either because I don't really feel like the word servant addresses or perfectly describes what I do with my leaders as well. And then it made me really think about words and words we use. I went down a whole rabbit hole of all the words I use and religious words and all these things. But I think that it's what I love is one that you posted it because a lot of people would not post something like that because it could be triggering to people because in today's age, everyone's triggered by something. And that's not something that is, I think, an easy thing to just like post about. So I'm glad we're having this conversation too. But I really like the way that you have described how you feel about this and the kind of inspiration behind it. Because again, I think it's important to have these conversations because words are very important, especially for our community. I find that a lot of admins, the way that we describe our roles affect a lot how people see us. And if they see us as a servant, I've been called a slave before, which was really upsetting to me because those are really just not the right words, I believe, to describe our profession and can really affect how other people treat us. That's what I'm trying to get to, is that how we describe our roles will affect how other people see us. So I think that this is a really good perspective, and I'm curious to hear from others and what they believe. So if you have not seen Natalie's post on LinkedIn, go check it out, go leave a comment, go message her, or message me because I'm just curious about what people's thoughts are. Thank you so much for sharing about this. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to share on this topic before we move on to the next one.
No, I appreciate you bringing this up. If I can just reiterate, like I am not attacking anybody's religion. I am not attacking, being in service of a cause or a certain belief. Again, I'm a religious studies major on purpose. I am an individual that's very, very strong in my own faith. And so it's not around the perspective of servant leadership or having a servant heart. It's specifically around the vernacular of service.
Awesome. So the next topic, you mentioned earlier that you are a cancer survivor, and I know that there are definitely others in the admin industry that are also cancer survivors. We actually did an event at Google on breast health, and we had 2 breast cancer survivors speak about their stories. And so one, just amazing that you are resilient and still here, just very grateful to God, universe, whatever you believe in, that you are still here with us. And I'm curious about, how did surviving cancer and going through everything that you had to go through during that time really affect now how you view work, your career, and how just you live life?
Yeah, I think the first thing that it did was really solidified intentional gratitude as one of my core values. Life is too short. And I think a lot of people learn this, unfortunately, from the 2020 pandemic, right? Where sometimes we didn't get a chance to say the things we wanted to say. Don't wait for that moment. Don't wait until you can't say it anymore. Being, I think, overly thankful is something that I'm known for. I will text my best friend and be like, you're so beautiful and I love you so much and you're so talented. She's a graphic designer, which is not my skill set. I am just mind blown at the things that she does. And so I'll be like, you're so great. Thank you for being you, right? Or telling my husband, thank you for being my best friend and my rock, or especially with my 10-year-old as she gets older, thanking her for her contributions to the house, or thanking her for like being a good shopping buddy, or thanking her for giving me grace on my bad mom days. So intentional gratitude has become increasingly important to me. And I think the second thing, and probably more noticeably, people will know this by meeting me very, very briefly, is that like life's too short. I have a tattoo here on my arm. It says memento mori, which in Latin means remember that you will die. That sounds morbid. That's okay. For me, it's just a reminder that like life is not promised. Eternity is not promised. And so I live my life from the perspective of like, why the heck not? Hey, Nat, do you want to be an EA to the C-suite, which is a role you've never heard of or never done before? Yeah, why the heck not? We were on our honeymoon in Maui in July and August, and I am somebody who's deathly afraid of water. We went snorkeling and my husband was like, please don't drown. I also don't know how to swim. And
Wow.
Our captain took us to 135-foot deep water and said, if you want to experience it, like now's your time. And I looked at Terrence and I just told him like, I'm going to do it. Why the heck not? While Maui is not necessarily a super exotic destination, it was our first time in Hawaii. It was a moment. I was there with my brand new husband. We were on our honeymoon. I was safe and protected. And so I took a pool noodle and jumped into the ocean. I was stung by a jellyfish literally immediately after I jumped in. But like,
that is crazy.
Yeah, why the heck not, right? It's like I'm covered in tattoos. Mel, you and I have talked about this, and I had a family member at one point say, Nat, tattoos are permanent. Yes, they are. And life is not. And so like, that's just, kind of how I live my life. I mentioned this earlier as a former gymnast, I have this 0% switch or 172% switch, right? I don't have a 68% switch. I don't have anything in the middle. And that's really just how I've approached life. Is life's too short. Why the heck not? Tell your people you love them. Ask the questions if you're curious, and live life like it could be your last day, because, for a lot of people, it is their last day. And for me specifically, I got a call that, granted, it wasn't my last day, but it was not a situation that I was expecting. And it was so much more drastic than anything else that I was dealing with. Our catering for an event didn't show up. Einstein Bagels didn't show up for an event that I was at. And then I got cancer that day. Like,
wow.
Yeah. It's,
you just never know.
Yeah, you never know. And there are many things in life that are not as serious as they feel.
I'm glad you're saying that, because something I often share with other admins on whether my team or people that I work with is when people are freaking out about an event about food, or I don't know, some executive wants a meeting that has to happen that's not really for anything urgent. And I always say urgent to me is like someone is potentially dying, or there really is millions of people are going to be affected in some way, potentially negatively. Don't stress yourself out about this kind of stuff, because it really does not matter as much as other things in life really do and does. Too often, because in our position, we are under these high stress, we get urgent requests, often in high stressful environments, dealing with people who are under probably even more stress sometimes than us, that we can really forget what matters most in life. But I just love that you give us that reminder. It's good also to remind a lot of our executives too that life is too short. I think a lot of times executives are under, again, these pressure and they forget that, yes, what they're doing is important, but sometimes it's not as important as someone's life. Unless you're in the medical field, then yes, everything is very important. And I don't know what to tell you. I'm not best to advise you in that case. Obviously, there are certain situations where you could really affect people's lives, but a lot of the other ones, especially in tech, at least from my perspective, I'm like, it will be fine.
Yeah. And it's right. It's a reminder that I have to give myself, because I am somebody, again, 184%. I think that percentage keeps increasing, like further into our conversation, which shouldn't surprise anybody. I'm also a double fire sign, so I will blame that on my zodiac as well. But even my coworkers will tell you that I have a tendency to overact, not overreact, but overact to certain situations, because it feels like the most important thing, the most urgent thing, or holy cow, we have to get this done right now. And I often have to check myself, or I'll go upstairs and my husband will be like, whoa, it's not that serious. Like, it's important. Your integrity is important. Your reputation is important. Your income is important. But, it's not as serious as you feel like it is in this moment.
Yes, I totally agree. And since we're talking about something that is stressful, as our jobs can be stressful, getting diagnosed with cancer is obviously stressful. Do you now have any kind of self-care plan that stress management plan, or I call it like a trigger plan? Like if something triggers me, I'm like, I have 10 things that I know that I can do to make me calm down versus like heat up even more. So I'm curious if you have anything in your life like that.
I am the worst person about boundaries. I really struggle with work-life harmony. I don't believe in work-life balance. Work-life harmony is how I refer it.
I agree with you.
Yes. So I am the worst person about those things, especially working and being in school and being a parent and, being a human and all of these things. But for me, I write everything out. So as much as I love technology and software and the digital age, it helps for me to do a stress release by writing things out. So our listeners won't be able to see this, but I have a hoard of very brightly colored pens and pencils and highlighters, because writing in bright colors or angry colors or sad colors, whatever, is what helps me release. I get a really cool journal. I have one with butterflies around here somewhere, and I just write and I just take it all out in that moment. I'm also a big reader, which won't surprise anybody from the English Lit degree, but I read books that are fantasy. I don't read books that can happen in Arvada, Colorado down the street from me. I read about worlds that I will not tell you they don't exist, but I am not present in those worlds. And so it gives me an opportunity to really take myself out of the situation that I'm in and just be elsewhere, where I tell my husband, I just need to not be for a minute. I don't know what that means, but I just need to not.
So interesting. I've spoken to so many people and I feel as though they're either on one camp or the other, which is they either read a lot of fiction and fantasy, like you're saying, or they're like personal development, self-help, memoir, and you're on the one camp and I'm on the other camp.
Yes.
Because I have been really trying to convince myself to be in your camp, but there's something like you're saying about boundaries and going 100%. There's something in my mind that's if you take 4 hours and read a fiction book or a fantasy book, you could have become better. You could have done 800 other things. So I'm really trying to work through that right now of allowing myself just to relax, which I'm not very good at all, that I'm learning in the recent years that probably other people already knew about me way before. But I think that that's really awesome that you have some of those stuff. Do you have any favorite books that you can share? Or any good books that you like? I always feel that that's such a tough question. I literally made a doc that if I ever get asked this on a podcast, I have it ready to go.
My favorite fiction series is A Court of Thorns and Roses, which again, I'm probably going to expose myself for those of you who read the series. That's okay. Fully supportive. My favorite nonfiction book, and really a good refresher, Mal, even it would be great for you, is Untamed by Glennon Doyle.
Oh, I have that book. I read it.
Yes. It just triggers something in me to be yeah, you're a baller. You are the best of the best. You are right, Natalie. You can do this.
I love that. I love that. Is there anything that you wish more people knew about you that you feel as though people don't already know?
That is such a good question. I feel like I'm an open book, but also you will know how I feel at any point in the time. You'll never have to wonder how I'm feeling about someone or something or somewhere, etc. What people knew about me. I really care a lot. When I find something I care about or somebody I care about, it is full on I care about them. Again, 0% or, 100, whatever number we're at now. So yeah, I really care.
So I knew this is why I wanted you on the podcast, because when I got asked the same kind of question in college, I answered the same exact way. I was like, I just want people to know that I genuinely cared in life, because there's a lot of people that go through life and don't care, and they like pride themselves into like, I don't care and I could be heartless or whatever. And we're not that way. So I love that that is your answer.
Yes, I will say my Terrence and I had this conversation yesterday about a certain football player that I have very strong opinions about. I really care if I care. If I don't care, it's the complete opposite.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Again, we're the same exact way. The next thing is another LinkedIn post, which I thought was really interesting, was titled, "What Legacy Are You Building?" And I won't read this one because it's a little bit longer, but I loved it because, one, you mentioned your grandmother, and I have a deep love for my grandmother. So anytime I see anything with grandparents, I get very choked up and it just touches me. I'm curious, what legacy are you building and hoping to continue to build?
Oh, that article is so good. That was my grieving method when I lost my grandma in October of 2020. Yeah. And I talked about Chadwick Boseman, who is an incredible human being. For those of you who don't know who he is, the legacy I'm leaving, the legacy I'm building is just passion. This goes back to our last conversation. Like, if I care, I really, really care. Passion, curiosity. I love to learn. I'm innately curious. I want to know more, all the things, all the time. And 3, I just want people to remember me with a smile and be like, oh yeah, Nat was cool or nice or helpful or supportive or all of those things.
I love it. I love it. So we have a tradition, which is I've stolen from Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO podcast, where the last guest asks the next guest one last question. And the question that I have for you today from our last guest is, what part of your role sparks the most joy?
I love a good thank you. And this is probably one of the more difficult things about our roles, especially because our leaders and our teams and our companies move so quickly that sometimes it's forgotten. And that's okay. I'm not in this profession to get, the spotlight. But I love a good, genuine gratitude statement. It touches on my core principles of like being intentionally thankful for things. And so I love a good statement of like, wow, Nat, you just saved X amount of time, or I was so stressed about this. Or my favorite is if I'm asked to do something and I'm like, oh yeah, it's already done. It's scheduled for X, Y, and Z. We've sent flowers, we've sent, whatever. And my leader will go, oh my gosh, thank you. And just to see the relief and hear the relief or even feel the relief from Slack, that is what sparks the most joy, is a good moment of gratitude.
Yes. And this is the call to action to every single person listening that knows Natalie, is to go message her thank you in some way. Be the most thoughtful thank you you've ever written. You're going to make her world.
Yes.
So that's the call to action. Completely bombard her inbox and LinkedIn with thank you messages. For doing this podcast or whatever else that Natalie has helped you with. So that's my call to action for this podcast.
I love it. I don't know when this is going to be released, but my birthday is next week, December 6th. Shout out to my fellow Sagittarius friends.
Guess what? Well, it's going to be released the day before your birthday, hopefully. So, perfect timing. So we got lots of things going to be a great call to action, say thank you and a happy birthday.
Incredible.
And if you're listening to this in like 3 months, still message Natalie, thank you and happy birthday. Because, we should just celebrate your birthday every single day of the year this time.
Honestly agree. Fully support.
Love it. So next up is our rapid fire round. So you're going to fill in the blanks to these. Natalie's guilty pleasure is?
Pickles.
Oh, interesting. Natalie's hype song or artist is?
Fall Out Boy.
Oh, nice. Natalie's favorite sports team is?
Washington Commanders.
If Natalie could support any athlete in the world as their EA, he or she would be?
Aaron Gordon.
Oh, interesting. Natalie thinks every admin should blank at least once in their career.
Live the day of your executive.
One thing still on each of Natalie's professional and personal bucket lists are?
Personal bucket list, I would love to go skydiving. Professional bucket list, I would love to visit Atlassian Sydney office.
Oh, yes, Australia. That's on my bucket list too. I wonder how close the Google and Atlassian offices are from each other. But if you're going, you need to let me know, because maybe I'll go make a trip there too.
I will call.
no reason professionally to go, I will still just find a way to go. And that's usually what I do. I like book personal travel, but then still end up working or doing some kind of event.
Yep.
And then Natalie is more than.
I want to say more than an admin because
you can do that if you want. We can end that way. Love it. So I want to say thank you so much for not only just being on the podcast, but being so authentic and then being just so self-aware. I don't think I've really met someone that like has said so many of the things that you have shared, because usually I'm the one that's like, these are the self-awareness stuff that you should do, and like pushing the self-awareness game. But I feel like you are so self-aware with me, and I love that. I'm always looking for people who are very self-aware and just being so fun to speak with. I'm just so impressed by you. I love that you love sports as well, because I'm always looking for other sports fanatics like myself. Although, like, again, our teams are not the same.
Fair. No beef with the Giants.
One day we have to go together to a game at some point, because I like to go to Colorado. I like to visit there. So hopefully next time I'm in town, we can make that happen.
Excellent. Fully supportive.
Love it. So where can people connect with you, and how can our community best support you?
So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I don't have a Facebook on purpose. So you can hit me up on LinkedIn. Happy to chat, happy to mentor, happy to be a safe space for questions and support me. Keep advocating for yourselves. It's something that I'm super passionate about as an individual and as an assistant and, as a leader and as a parent. Keep advocating for yourself. Know thyself. Know thy strengths, know thy weaknesses, and continue to tell yourself that you are the best, because those self-affirmations are important.
Love it. And I forgot to ask you this before, so I'll ask it now. Is anything that we didn't get to cover that you just want to quickly share?
1, imposter syndrome is okay. It's super normal. It is everything is figure outable, especially imposter syndrome. 2, Untamed by Glennon Doyle is one of the best books I've read as an assistant. It really triggered and boosted my confidence and my self-awareness and my career. And 3, two-way partnership is so, so important. Please understand that two-way partnerships are possible and important, and you are a valued member of your partnership and your leadership team, even with an assistant title.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the More Than an Admin podcast. Make sure you have subscribed, and if you're feeling a little generous, please also leave a review, because we love your feedback. And remember to share this podcast with those around you. If you're looking for more content, check out morethananadmin.com, our YouTube channel, or follow us at morethananadmin on all platforms. If you're looking to connect directly with me, you can find me at Mallory is More on all platforms, or search for me on LinkedIn. Let's continue together to influence how the world views administrative professionals and help admins embrace all aspects of their identity to become their best selves. Remember, you are more than your job title, and the best is still yet to come. I'll talk with you soon.